I still remember the day it all started. It was a quiet evening in our village. The birds had just stopped singing, and the last of the sun's glow was fading. I was by the river, gathering water when I first heard the whispers about strange rituals happening at the edge of the village. People were talking about a family, known for their wealth but with no clear source of it. Their compound was large, and unlike the rest of us, they lived like kings. But then, someone mentioned that their daughter, Amina, was sick. Only, it wasn't the kind of sickness anyone had ever seen before. I remember how it felt like my skin was crawling when I heard that. Amina was young, full of life. How could she suddenly fall so ill? The rumor spread like wildfire. They said she was bewitched, that someone had cast a spell on her. But later that night, I overheard two elders talking quietly under a tree, discussing something darker. They didn't see me listening, but what they said haunted me. They whispered, it wasn't sickness that took Amina's light away. It was our own family. Days passed, and Amina's illness grew worse. Her mother would visit the village healer, bringing back strange herbs, but Amina only seemed to suffer more. She began losing weight, her eyes were sunken, and she rarely spoke. It was as if something had stolen her soul, leaving behind just a shell. Then, one evening, I saw her outside her house, staring at nothing. She looked empty, and her gaze was haunting. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, trying to shake off the feeling that something was horribly wrong. And then I heard it, a sound I still hear in my nightmares. It was the sound of muffled cries, coming from the direction of Amina's home. They were desperate and weak, like someone pleading for mercy. I crept out of my hut, moving closer to their compound, hiding in the shadows. That's when I saw them, Amina's father, her uncle, and a few other men, carrying her into a small hut at the far end of the compound. The men had cold expressions, faces that seemed devoid of any feeling. What happened next, it's hard to put into words. The days that followed were a blur of horror and disbelief. Rumors turned into twisted tales that hung over the village like a heavy cloud. Some people claimed they had seen strange figures in the night, cloaked in black, moving in and out of Amina's compound. Then, one of the women, an old midwife who lived on the edge of the village, came to me in tears. She told me that Amina's father had paid her to keep quiet, but she could no longer bear the guilt. She told me the truth. The family had forced Amina into a ritual, a dark and twisted one. They had brought a dog into the hut with her, a monstrous creature they had acquired from somewhere unknown. And under the watchful eyes of her father and uncle, they forced her to do the unspeakable. They said it was for wealth and power. That her sacrifice would bring them more fortune than they could ever imagine. I didn't want to believe it. It sounded too monstrous, too insane. But the look in the midwife's eyes told me everything I needed to know. She had seen it with her own eyes. The next time I saw Amina, she was no longer the girl I remembered. Her face was hollow, her skin pale. She looked lost, broken in a way that was hard to describe. And soon after, the worst happened, she became pregnant. The entire village knew, but no one spoke of it. It was as if a silent agreement had fallen over us all. No one wanted to confront the truth. Months passed, and her belly grew. Her family kept her hidden, telling everyone she had fallen ill and couldn't leave the house. But everyone knew, and whispers circulated, too dark and terrible to be ignored. They said her family's fortune had doubled, that they were planning to expand their lands. But the sight of her, bloated and hollow-eyed, was enough to haunt anyone who dared to look. One night, there was a commotion at Amina's compound. The midwife, the same woman who had confided in me, was summoned in a panic. I followed her quietly, hiding behind trees and shadows. When I reached the house, I could hear her cries from within, piercing and desperate. After what felt like hours, the crying stopped, and there was a chilling silence. And then, the cries of a baby broke through the quiet. But these cries, they were not normal. They were sharp, animalistic, like the sound of a wounded creature. The midwife came out, her face as white as chalk. She was trembling, her hands stained with blood. She looked at me, and I knew, in that instant, that something had been born, but it wasn't a child. It was something else, something twisted by the dark ritual her family had forced upon her. The next morning, Amina was nowhere to be found. Her family claimed she had run away, unable to bear the shame of her condition. But I knew better. The midwife later confided in me that Amina had died shortly after giving birth, her body too frail to handle the horror she had been put through. Her family tried to bury her in secrecy, hoping to rid themselves of the curse they had brought upon her. But no matter how much wealth they gained, their lives spiraled downward. The strange creature that was born, half human, half something else, was kept hidden. They feared it, but they could not bring themselves to destroy it, as they believed it was their source of power. But the curse was relentless. One by one, members of our family fell ill. Their fortune began to rot, just like the lives they had destroyed. In the end, there was nothing left but misery and darkness. To this day, the villagers say you can still hear Amina's cries echoing in the dead of night, a haunting reminder of the terrible act that took place. Her family's compound is abandoned now, overgrown with weeds and silence. No one dares to enter, for fear of seeing the shadow of what they had created. As for me, I can't erase the memory of her face, her hollow eyes. I still hear her cries in my sleep. And sometimes, when I pass by that cursed place, I think I see her there, a figure in the shadows, watching me. No one speaks of Amina anymore, as if forgetting her will erase the horror of what happened. But I can't forget. The memory lives on, as real as the day I first heard those terrible whispers. Amina's story is a caution, a tale of horror that will haunt this village for generations. And I, the witness to it all, carry the weight of her tragedy with me, a reminder that sometimes, the darkest evil comes from those who should protect us most.